Some months ago, I received a letter after we have sent a letter to the Law Reform and Development Commission, and we highlighted the lack of this law and how it affects the poor men on the street and so on. And the chairman of the Law Reform and Development Commission was advising that they, together with Ministry of Trade, are busy conducting a study, and I know that they have been to England, maybe also South Africa and perhaps Australia. I'm not quite sure about the countries, whereby they are trying to draft a bill so that such a law can be enacted. But one of the sectors that you mentioned, the financial sector, especially insurance, even health, there's some consumer protection already. But we also know that the biggest culprits in our country who are maybe not very polite to consumers in terms of taking their money is the insurance industry. They are the biggest. If you look at, because we need to, as society, we need to look at the proportionality. How much damage do a person or an organization cost the country? So the insurance industry, when you look at the government civil servants pension fund, it was about more than 600 million. And then you had this, I don't want to mention names, but we know what is happening there. NAMPISA recently had a public consultation about the envisaged new bill, the FIM bill, that we hope would be improving the consumer's plight. But they invited the private sector, but the consumer rights institutions and activists were not invited. So we can see how the community activists and the agenda is being treated. Where these rights are already protected, for example, like in the financial sector, NAMPISA is there. People, public servants simply requested information as to who took money and how much did they take from GIPF. That information has not been forthcoming. But I mean, I've also been involved personally, and I've been exchanging letters with the head of state, where he also expressed his profound concern about the state of affairs. But I'm also currently still involved, where I mean, even one or two of the panelists might be, whereby because if government says, if cabinet says there should be criminal and civil proceedings against the individuals, and if the policies have been instructed, the best we could do is perhaps to wait. And it's only a month since we anticipate by end of September there should be some answers. If not, I would really encourage civil servants, and perhaps we are, because they are also consumers and the institutional support is there. I don't want to divulge too much information on that. But you see, where there is sectoral consumer protection, for example, the Competition Commission, the right to food has been threatened, where the agri industry in Namibia, you have the farmer who's the producer, and then you have the miller. These people get together at the lodge, and then they decide their product should be sold at this price to the consumer. That is price fixing. It is not advantageous to the consumer. So we lost a complaint to the Competition Commission. It's almost a year now. We haven't even received an acknowledgement letter. So now what do? Do you take the farmer and the producer to court, or is it the regulator? Because there's protection in terms of the law. We lost a complaint to CRAN, the communications law implementers, when MTC, with regard to Aware, I think you something like $30 that you had to pay, and then the minutes allocated was 100. But in the meantime, while the advert stated that, they reduced the minutes, so it was misleading and it violated the law. So our organization lost a complaint, and CRAN found that these people violated the law, but then they refused to fine them. So I mean, why do you have the law if you cannot, if you say this person has committed murder, but he should not be sent to jail, the no penalty? I mean, it does not make sense. So I think, I don't know what really one needs to do, but even where there is protection, it's not used. But with regard to the right to food, some 2-3 years ago, Ministry of Finance tried to remove VAT from some basic food items like beans and so on. What did these private sector people do? They simply the money that was intended to go back to the pockets of the people went to the pockets of these business people. So I don't know if our court system is willing to assist the men on the street, but even the Law Society wanted lawyers to keep. I don't want to go too much into that because those people can sue you. And as you mentioned, you need to have money. But a good colleague must, under the report, together with our organization, lodge a complaint again to the Competition Commission that lawyers should not be allowed to fix their price. Because if you go to lawyer A, the consultation is 500. The next lawyer is still 500. There should be competition, economic rivalry among them, so that we can benefit. Even on that one, there's not been much communication, but I read some in recent days that Master Delbert has been able to perhaps convince a court there in the north, so that even a person who is not admitted could represent another in the court. So it's also access to justice. So I don't know really what we should do, but there's a lot of work for civil society, but the challenge is resources. And if consumers are taxpayers and if they are suffering, then I think we should also start looking at our politicians. Are they representing us adequately? Yeah, I think we should start there perhaps.
Thank you. On the issue of mushrooming of churches in Namibia, I should say the Council of Churches is not a legal entity that registered churches. We are a fellowship of churches, meaning that there is no law in our country that registered civil society organizations. So we are in a way very fortunate in Namibia that there is no watchdog over civil society organizations. And that really gives us more accountability on ourselves, whether we really can transform ourselves into organizations that really serve the purpose why that specific civil society organization exists. So we cannot control the mushrooming of churches in this country. It is a democratic country, so whereas we know that a church, on which principles a church should be founded, we cannot control the mushrooming of churches in our country. So the council can really not do that. With regards to the financial management in churches, of course, tithing, sacrifices, offerings are biblical, and we do preach, and we do encourage our members to tithe and to give offerings. But that is supposed to be properly managed like any other institution. The church should also be a professional institution that really manages the income that people pledge or give in forms of tithes and offerings. Here we, and I mentioned it already, that we as church leaders, like any other institution, should have proper institutional mechanisms as to how your denomination or your church is managed and administered. And leadership, again, here plays a very vital role. So when it comes to really managing your resources in the church, it should be run at the same principles as any other governance structure. So tithing, we will preach and we will demand from our members to give, but we don't say somebody should pledge their entire salaries. That is not biblical. The Bible is very clear. We have, in fact, there are biblical economics. That's a clear principle as to how to teach your membership, as to how to manage your finances, how to manage your income, how to manage socially, economically. The church is in fact the body that should teach people from childhood up to adulthood as to how to be stewards of your resources, of the resources that you are managing. So there again, it is just a fact of leadership and proper management and administration.
Madam Moderator, I'd like to engage on that same point. I heard you, Madam Kapere, that you flagged that we are fortunate to have this mushrooming organization, churches that are coming around. Isn't it an unfortunate situation, because the issues that are raised on the table is that we are suffering on the ground as families, as households, because of the situation that is erupting now. You also, within your first presentation, flagged that government, we need leadership. The country lacks leadership in this country. However, I want to draw it back to the issue raised by Mr. Tyson and the fellow comrade at the other side around the leadership within CCN. What is CCN doing to curb what is going on, to also be able to take responsibility? Because we are, as citizens and as churchgoers, we are relying on the leadership that is coming. You just flagged that it shapes how we are going to be out there. So maybe we can engage around that, because I think it's a very crucial thing, because in this country, and I'm glad that you actually said you're a fellowship, people are of the understanding that CCN is the mother body of churches. And we don't have that understanding. And I think it's about time. And it goes very directly to Ms. Edwards' question about the juncture of information and access, and also taking responsibility to be able to keep everybody in leadership, be it government, be it civil society, accountable for those positions that they're holding.
Mrs. Kapere will respond to that, and then we'll move on to Mukulani and throw it open again to the floor.
Well, as we know, a democratic society and a country with democratic constitution, just like anybody else, claims for his rights to exist. I think churches can, and leaders who want to establish churches have the right to establish a church. Nobody controls. The fact that we are a leadership, a fellowship body is open. I mean, it's a fact. If anybody who wants to know about the council can come to the council, and those facts are there. We can give you those facts. And we are actually, wherever we go, we pronounce ourselves as what body, what kind of a body we are. So if anybody needs information, it's open. We will give you that information, that this is a fellowship. We don't hide it. So with regards to mushrooming of churches, I said any civil society organization and a church, although we don't categorize ourselves as an NGO, we are an institution who really has its own principles, its own governance mechanisms and structures. We cannot prescribe to somebody who wants to come and establish a church. That is the function of the government. But however, whoever, whether they are members to council or not members, when they come, we accommodate them. With regards to how to educate, how do we exert ourselves, our mission and our goals, we have established the fact that the Council of Churches is equally like any other institution, not competent enough to really implement what we are supposed to be implementing. So we are currently in that process to enhance this mechanism, to build the capacity of ourselves as management, our executive, our church leaders, and currently we are setting up ecumenical committees all over the country now, so that these ecumenical committees are the eyes and the ears of the communities. We are trying now to work out mechanisms how to involve constituency councillors, local authority councillors in our planning for socio-economic development in our societies. So we are really in that process. We have uncovered everything. We have discovered that we have incompetencies as leaders of an organization, and we are restructuring ourselves accordingly. And in that, we also have a clear strategy of how to transform now our leaders, that is church leaders, how to build the capacity of our communities to be their own, to chart their own future for their own development. So we are really in a process to transform ourselves as a developing agency.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for those questions. I would like to, before I get to Edith's question, I would like to just make a comment regarding Mr. Eben's question to the to the Consumer Protection Group. In the spirit of neighborliness, the South African Access to Information Law applies to the private sector. So it's not just information held by government, but it's also information held by businesses. And if at all those companies that you had difficulties with, if at all they are based in South Africa, they have head offices in South Africa, you will be able to use the South African legislation to force them to release the information that you want about the situation here in Namibia. So there's a possibility there that you may want to consider. On Edith's question regarding how you get communities to buy in or to understand the importance of using their right of access to information, we learned this the hard way. When the Access to Information Act was adopted in 2000, we did a round of training sessions. We did road shows where we were basically creating public awareness about the legislation. We gave detailed training on the mechanics of the law. A year later, I think we were lucky if we got 2 requests for information as a result of those training sessions that we conducted. So we went back to the groups that we had been dealing with and we said, what happened? And essentially, they couldn't make the link between the access to information legislation and their situation on the ground. To an extent that we basically decided to stop training people on the access to information law. What we did in our community outreach exercises was to say to them, what are your issues? So we didn't go there to tell them about the law. We went there to find out what their issues were. In one group they said, we are living in an informal settlement, in a squatter camp. We've been in the squatter camp for 20 years. Government is spending billions of rand building houses for the poor. What about us? When are we going to be allocated houses like everybody else? So that's what they wanted to know. What about me? How am I moving out of this situation? When am I moving out of this situation? So the response was, what have you done to find this information? No, our counselor is unresponsive. Our counselor doesn't even come here to deal with our issues. And we would ask, so what else did you do? If your counselor is not responding to your queries, what have you done? The response we got was, well, we've written to the mayor to ask the mayor about what the municipality is planning for us to be able to get access to these government subsidies and these houses that are being built. And the mayor is not responding. So this is when we started to say to them, convert your letter to the mayor, make it an official access to information request. So instead of writing to the mayor and saying to the mayor, when are you going to build houses for us? Ask the municipality for their housing policy, for their housing development plans. Ask them for their budget. so that you can see whether or not there is any budgeting that has been done for delivery of houses. Now, these are not sophisticated groups. Indeed, they did that afterwards, and they got tons of information. They called us back. Well, the municipality has responded. We have tons of information. It makes 0 cents to us. So we had to step back in, because we are not housing development specialists. We had to step back in, connect them to groups or professionals that could help them make sense of the data that has been released in terms of the access to information legislation. By this, what I'm trying to illustrate is that, as I said on Monday, that this will not work if communities are left on their own. It is important for those of us who have awareness to step in and make those connections. So if it's about a matter regarding access to ARVs in a clinic, for example, we can make a request for information related to the delivery of medication to a particular clinic. We might be able to get the information back, but we would still need your organization to help us make sense of the budgeting, to help us make sense of whether this information that has been given will actually address the need on the ground. So I think it was for us a learning curve, in a sense that we are access to information advocates and champions. So we were going there teaching people about the Access to Information Act, and people were looking at us going, okay, nice to know, but how does it help me? And so these networks, we needed to have these networks to create these opportunities. And then there was a question that Ms. Lucy Edwards about the disjuncture between accessing information and action. In one of our cases, it related to delivery of water in a village in KwaZulu-Natal. They were not getting access to water that other people were getting from the municipal water delivery scheme. And so they kept on asking the municipality or the local government councillors, what about us? What about us? They were not getting any answers. There was Mukelani again, helping them get access to information about budgets, about plans for delivery of water. We got the information and we left. We thought our job was done. 6 months later, when we were checking up on them, so what has happened? Oh, well, you got us the information, but we still don't have water. You know, this is because, again, our mistake was not to ensure that once they have this information, they are able to go back to the municipality and say, hey, this is what the plan says. So what about it? You know, when is this happening? And I think that's a critical element that needs to be part of advocacy, that it's not just sufficient to access the information, but you need to be able to provide the necessary support such that action arises from that access. You need to be able to give people that information that they wanted, but also enable them to go back and ask difficult questions. Thank you.
There's one additional comment, and then I think we can possibly take 2 more questions before we end the session.
Okay, the interface between information and action. Okay, I will be brief. The example is maybe from South Africa, being our big brother or sister in this case. But to Lucy's question about the interface and making connections that you were just talking, that information sometimes, the right information needs to be sought also to make that kind of connections, and sometimes it's necessary for civil society organizations to make the connections on behalf of people. Again, I said the examples are from South Africa, where they do have industries and mines which are where men are working. There was the routine screening or survey for exposure to harmful toxins, asbestos, lead, agricultural pesticides, etc., are routinely done for male workers, and women as people who are indirectly or who are not involved in the formal economic sector are not screened. And here civil society organizations stepped in and they said, but why don't we also look at those women who are screen or do surveillance on women who are sweeping the floors? And they found out that indeed these women were very highly exposed to, in this case, asbestos, and action could be taken as a result. The same, I talked about pesticides. One needs to make, or civil society needs to make those connections. I'm thinking also for action, but also government needs to make the connections. The question about parity, gender parity in education is another example. That people look at enrollment of boys and girls to measure equality, gender equality. They look at dropout rates, but a more nuanced look, maybe gender nuanced look, will suggest that there are many girls who are absent 20% of the year. And why are they absent? People found out that it's because they are menstruating. They are scared of the stigma, the embarrassment, the ridicule. And this impacts on education and it impacts on equal access. But people maybe don't ask the right questions. And that's all I wanted to say about the interface.
I just wanted to agree with both the previous speakers that as civil society we have a huge responsibility when it comes to not just dumping information in communities on communities, but actually empowering them to be able to use that information to realize their rights. And just to cite a really good example from Namibia, that recently was a great victory for women living with HIV and civil society organizations working in terms of promoting human rights within the HIV response. At the end of last month, the High Court of Namibia just passed a judgment in favor of 3 women living with HIV who were sterilized without their informed consent, and that started out of a discussion of a community group, Namibia Women's Health Network, held with their support groups and women living with HIV about, what experiences were they having when they access sexual and reproductive health rights, sexual and reproductive health services. And many of the women and many of the young women standing up and saying, you know what, actually, on my hospital card it says BLT, and them wanting to know what that actually means, and many of them actually then realizing that a vast majority of them had been sterilized without their informed consent, and that then, further down 2-3 years down the line, led to litigation supported by one of our partners, the Legal Assistance Center, supporting the women to actually take their case to court. Now, the judgment actually found that it reaffirmed that all citizens of Namibia have the right to informed consent, and that you can't get consent when people are in duress, when they're busy, and they're in labor. That's not informed consent, and that actually it calls now on the Namibian government to have specific policies in place about soliciting informed consent and under what conditions that needs to happen. It was sad for us because it didn't specifically speak to the issue of the fact that the women were, all of them, HIV positive, and that the health professionals knew that. But I think it was a great victory for communities in Namibia, knowing that they can actually realize their rights, and that example around how women were able to get information and use that information to protect their rights. Thank you.
Frederico Links from Inside Namibia. I think what Mukulani was getting at, in a sense, is that civil society in Namibia is challenged to be more proactive in terms of information sharing. Because oftentimes you find a situation where civil society organizations produce information, and then they sit on it, or they report only to their donors and narrow constituencies. And in terms of access to information, access is an empowering process, is a democratizing process. And in order for the individual, the ordinary member of the public, to be able to be robust in terms of accessing information, I think it would help if civil society organizations demonstrate some proactivity as well. And that is, I think, part of what Mukulani is saying. That is also an educative process in terms of trying to get people, you know, and organizations to be less passive in terms of getting